let me explain, using game theory, why I was able to predict that the war between the United States and Iran would start. What is the game being played about? It's being played about trade access, right? It's about resources and how to control resources and how to move resources from one place to the next. Now, in the game of geopolitics, there's a very important theory that you need to know. It's called the Mackinder Theory. And Mackinder was a British military strategist. He explains how Britain, as a naval power, can maintain control over the world. So at this time in history, this is the 18th century, 19th century, people trade mainly by the sea because it's the cheapest, fastest way to trade around the world. The theory is very simple. If you want to control the world, you have to control certain maritime choke points in the world, and then the world has to obey you in order to access resources. And so the most important choke points are the Cape of Good Hope. It allows you to go around Africa and reach Asia. Then you have the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran now controls. You also have the Red Sea, which is where the Suez Canal is. And this is important because the Middle East is where most of the world's oil is produced. And you have to ship the oil through the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea in order to access the rest of the world, especially East Asia. You have something called the Strait of Malacca, which is between Indonesia and Malaysia. And the only way for East Asia, China, South Korea, and Japan to access Middle East oil is through the Strait of Malacca. You also have the Strait of Gibraltar. In the Western Hemisphere, you have the Panama Canal. And now what's happening is that you now have the Arctic being opened up. Most of human history, these were the critical maritime choke points. So as long as you're able to control these choke points, you basically control the world. And this is what gave rise to the British Empire. Otherwise, how could such a small island nation control the world? This is the theory. But there's a problem with this theory, which is that as the world industrializes, it becomes cheaper to build railways. And with railway, you can negate the sea. You can trade through land. You don't have to trade through sea anymore. And so the great fear amongst British strategists is that one power would emerge in Eurasia that could unify all of Eurasia and then blockade Britain from accessing Eurasia. And so the entirety of British strategy was to prevent a land power who could unify Eurasia. So at first, it was the French, right? This is what led to the Napoleonic Wars. And the reason why Britain fought these wars is to ensure that France cannot control Eurasia. Because if Napoleon controlled Eurasia, then Britain would collapse economically. Then, after Napoleon, this led to the Great Game between Russia and Britain for control of Central Asia. And then this is what led to World War I, right? Because Germany was emerging as the European hegemon. And if Europe became too powerful, then it could build railways into Central Asia, and Britain could not allow that. And that's what led to World War I and World War II. Now, after World War I and World War II, America became the empire, but America still maintained this system. And again, the idea is, in the game of geopolitics, what matters is trade access. And the way to maintain your empire is, one, to have the greatest navy in the world and control the choke points, but second of all, to create chaos within Eurasia. What's happening right now is that the entire Middle East is on fire. The GCC, the Gulf Cooperative Council, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, they're not able to export oil around the world anymore. And this leaves now two major suppliers of energy in the world. They are the United States, which controls the Western Hemisphere, and Russia. And that's what the Great Game is about. It's about trade access. It's about control of resources. It's about who is allowed to trade with who, right? So given that the Middle East is on fire, Japan, China, South Korea can either buy LNG and oil from the United States or Russia. And those are your two options. So that's what this war is about, according to game theory. So to understand the future, we have to use game theory to understand the situation of each nation state. So what is the source of American power? And the point of America is to protect the supremacy of the US dollar, because everyone now uses the US dollar and America can print an infinite number of them. So that's the source of American power. The problem with the US dollar is that it's a Ponzi scheme, meaning that the US dollar has no inherent value in itself. It's only valuable if people want it. And unfortunately, right now, because of financial corruption in America, because the American military is too overextended, a lot of nations are choosing to walk away from the US dollar. So look at Japan and China. They are selling more US treasuries. The GCC nations, for the longest time, were supporting the American economy, were buying US dollars. But because of this war, they're now forced to sell more US dollars in order to finance their own economies now that they can export oil. What's been happening is that the bond yields for US treasuries have been going up. This is a problem because right now America has $39 trillion in debt. So if the debt yield, the interest rate is 5 to 6%, that means America has to pay $2 trillion in interest payments alone annually. And you can imagine that over time, this entire Ponzi scheme will collapse. So America has absolutely no choice but to force the world to continue to buy US treasuries. So the only strategy available to America is to use the Mackinder hypothesis and create as much chaos as possible so that the world is forced to go to America to buy energy, weapons. So imagine a situation like this, where right now in Europe, there's a war going on between Europe and Russia. In East Asia, there's conflict now between Japan and China. In the Middle East, the conflict is between Iran versus the United States and Israel. Every one of these nations requires energy, oil, weapons. America is a continental fortress that has unified the Western Hemisphere. Now they have infinite resources. And they're able to turn these resources into weapons that they can sell the rest of the world. And the rest of the world is forced to buy US dollars in order to buy this energy and weapons from America, okay? So that's the American strategy moving forward. They have absolutely no choice in the matter because they're addicted to US dollars, require the rest of the world to buy US dollars, so they need to force the rest of the world to buy US dollars. So let's analyze why America is in decline. It's declining for every single reason why empires in the past have declined before. So the first major reason is financialization. It means that when an empire arises, it focuses on manufacturing. It focuses on creating real products, weapons, consumer goods. But over time, what an empire does is it offshores its manufacturing to other nations, to other groups. And it focuses on financial speculation, primarily the idea of usury, money lending. Why? Because that's the most profitable thing to do. But the problem is that financialization does not lead to real productive growth. It doesn't lead to real wealth generation. It only looks like money on paper. If you open a restaurant or you open a factory, you're contributing growth to the economy, right? On average, you could be seeing a return of 2%. But if you take the same money, you put in the stock market, you see a return of 5%. So who's going to do any work? And the reason why this arises is because of the nature of capital. Capital consolidates. Capital monopolizes. And once you monopolize, it's easier for you to make money. And you don't have to do a good job anymore, right? So think of Google and Apple. They spend most of their resources on stock buybacks in order to create this illusion that they're creating more value for stockbrokers. This is all financialization. And the problem with financialization is that it warps the mentality of your population. Before, what was important is to work hard and contribute to your community. And that meant that people took pride in going to the factory and making products and helping the factory become wealthier. Now, what matters is get rich now. So that's why people like Andrew Tate are so popular, right? Because he's telling you, hey, if you work hard, you're a sucker. You're a loser. If you follow the rules, if you listen to your boss, you're a loser. What you want to do is get rich and become your own boss, right? And that mentality has taken over young people. This is a huge problem because it means that it's hard for an empire in decline like America to invest in long-term projects. So in theory, AI could make America a much stronger society. It could create real wealth. The problem is, if you look at AI and what's been happening, is that it's basically a Ponzi scheme where there's only a few companies and they all just invest in each other, creating the illusion of wealth. And even today, no one knows how to make money out of AI. So OpenAI has ChatGPT. People don't appreciate this, but for every new subscriber to ChatGPT, they lose money. ChatGPT is not a profitable model. And no AI expert can tell you how to make money. And the problem is that in Empire Decline, it's all focused on speculation. It's about gambling. It's about getting rich as opposed to being practical and pragmatic, okay? That's the idea of financialization. That's the first problem with an empire in decline. Second problem is the demographic crisis. The idea is that because society is prosperous and it's stable and it's peaceful, people get older. And because they're getting older, they're able to monopolize much of the wealth, power, and status in society, leaving little opportunities for young people. And we're seeing that throughout the Western world today, where the baby boomers are in charge and they refuse to give up power. So think about these US presidents. They're all baby boomers. You go to Congress and you've got guys like Chuck Grassley, and he's 93 years old. Can you imagine that? And he's still working as a US senator. He's the fourth person in line to become president of the United States. And so what's happening in the Western world is the baby boomers refuse to retire. So what do young people do? They refuse to work. They refuse to have children. They become indifferent to society. But the next step is for them to fight each other, for a civil war to break out. And this is just historically what's always been true. And the last, most important, is the idea of elite overproduction. So this is an idea from a historian named Peter Turchin. He's trying to mathematically model how revolutions happen. And so he looked at the French Revolution, he looked at the fall of the Roman Republic, he looked at many serious events throughout human history. And mathematically, he discovered the main cause of civil war, of collapse, is you have too many elite struggling for too few positions of status, of power. So think about how in America, for the longest time, financiers were in charge. Wall Street was in charge. But then these past 20 years, you have the tech revolution. So now you have these tech oligarchs like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and Larry Ellison. And they want to be in charge as well. So what happened was that they sponsored someone to come into Washington, D.C. to overthrow the financial elite. And this person, of course, was Donald Trump. Who backed Donald Trump in 2024? Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, and Elon Musk. Because they're trying to overthrow the power of the financial elite and establish the power of the tech oligarchy. So what's going to happen in America over the next few years is a civil war rising between the old guard, Wall Street, and the new guard, Silicon Valley. And what Peter Turchin says is that this is the most common explanation for why societies go into decline.